Up next is the panel that we've all been waiting for, the start of our symposium, and it is alternatives to policing. Now, last year we had officials from different law enforcement agencies, and part of the feedback that we got from the community is that we wanted to hear from other people that are doing the work to make sure that our system changes, and that's why we're grateful for the following panel. The panel is going to be moderated by Subhash Kateel, who's coming on live right now. Hi, Subhash. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And you're the Florida Director of the Alliance for Safety and Justice. The flagship program is Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, and you represent about 6,000 crime survivors for safety and justice who are pursuing a new vision of public safety that centers the needs of survivors, which very important. So we're grateful to have you moderating this panel. And without further ado, I'm going to let you take it away from here.
No, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the Contigo Fund for allowing me to moderate this panel. And I'm just really appreciative to be here. And it feels so good to just be part of a really important conversation. And I'm going to introduce the folks that are going to be the panelists in a second. And, you know, when we were talking about what the panel would focus on a couple of days ago, we realized we wanted to reframe the conversation just a little bit. And if you bear with me, I'll explain why. A lot of the folks I'm going to bring onto the panel really see the safety and well-being of their loved ones, their community, our loved ones, our community, as all of our responsibilities, as something that we all need to be a part of, right? And so I think as we were talking, I think we had kind of an epiphany of really talking about safety and well-being and what it means for all of us to take the responsibility, but also to be supported in promoting the safety and well-being of all of our communities. And so the folks going to bring on really do that work day to day in terms of the folks that we love and the communities that we love. So if we can, I'd love to bring on the panelists. Hello. Have everyone? There we go. So thank you all very much for joining us. And, you know, this is a really important conversation. And as I said before in the introduction, you know, I think we wanted to have a different conversation, one that's really grounded in the understanding of safety and well-being and grounded in the idea that all of us feel the need to promote safety and well-being in our community. So what I wanted to do is I just wanted to have folks first introduce themselves and how they would like to be identified, the organization they're part of, and just a brief kind of goal for how they want folks to leave this panel when they get done hearing this. So I'm going to start to my right with Mone.
Subhash, how did I know you would start with me? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to have the opportunity to join you all today. My name is Mone Holder. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Programs at Florida Rising. Florida Rising is a statewide organization that organizes multiracial movements to win elections, change laws, and create a state where everyone can be safe, happy, healthy, and whole. We're a people-powered organization made up of members. We advance economic and racial justice across Florida. And one of the many ways that I serve the organization is by leading our issue-based campaign portfolio, which includes voting rights, reproductive justice, climate justice, and criminal system reform. So Asha, you asked what one of our goals for this panel is, and for me, it's of course to learn from my peers, but also to bring a perspective from a multiracial, multi-issue organization that has electoral politics and policy change at the core of what we do.
Thank you very much. I'm going to keep going in clockwise. So for me, that's Courtney.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. My name is Courtney Peters, and my pronouns are she, they. I am the Mobile Syringe Services Program Coordinator, which is a mouthful of a title, for Hope and Help here in Orange County, which means that I oversee our mobile syringe exchange unit. Hope and Help has been working for decades to address and prevent HIV rates from skyrocketing, and also to help those impacted by HIV. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk to Orlando and anyone else watching about what syringe access means and what harm reduction means. And I hope to also learn from all the amazing panelists here, but then I also, like I said, hope to bring a different perspective as a harm reductionist, as a new public health thing that we're seeing with harm reduction, and explain what that means on a deeper level for anyone who has any questions.
Beautiful, thank you. Chris, you're up next.
Awesome. Hey, y'all. So my name is Chris Furino. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the membership and lead organizer with Central Florida Jobs with Justice, which is a coalition of community organizations, labor unions, student groups, and faith groups working on issues that impact working people. And so a lot of the work that we do is at the intersection of like social and economic justice. We partner with a lot of the folks that are on this panel, which is really exciting. And a key aspect of my work is specifically in the topic of education justice, and is around working in Orange County Public Schools and building a alliance of community organizations, parents, students, and teachers working to increase the resources that are coming into our public schools, and making sure that the needs of all of those communities are met in our public schools. And so police-free schools work is a really core tenet of that. And so I'm just excited to have the opportunity to share more about what we're doing on police-free schools work locally, and what that means, and also vision with people about what we can actually work towards, and what does it mean when we're talking about alternatives to policing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dandelion.
Hi, friends. My name is Dandelion, they, them pronouns, and I am one of the co-founders of Peer Support Space. We're a lived experience-led mental health collective. I'm also an advisory group member for the Blue Trunk Community Garden, and an advisory board member for the Social Worker Coalition for Anti-Racist Education. Another one of those long titles. And I am really excited to be here. One of my hopes for the panel is I'm just really excited to be here to uplift mental health and emotional support resources that are humanity-centered alternatives to carceral care.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Aashutosh.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aashutosh Pyakuryal. I also go by the nickname Taj, if that's easier for some folks. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I work as a state coordinator for the Florida Student Power Network. The Florida Student Power Network is a multi-issue organization that works with high school and college-age youth across the state of Florida. And on this panel, I hope to bring the perspectives of students and young people, especially in regards to policing and policing in the school systems. And as I share, these perspectives, I also hope to gain different perspectives from everyone else on this panel. Some folks here feel like we work together a lot, but also there's some people here that are new that I'm hoping to get to know a little bit better. So I'll pass it back to you, Subhash.
Thank you. And as I said before, when we were thinking about the topic of alternatives to policing, it felt like a really good time to really talk about what we're really talking about in terms of our loved ones and our communities and the people we care about. And I want to share really briefly just a very quick experience that I think highlights to me the need to have a different conversation. Like I said, organization represents about 6,000 crime survivors across the state of Florida. And so I go to the Capitol a lot. And on my way back from the Capitol to the airport, my Uber driver was a retired police officer. And we started talking a little bit about how a significant portion of his calls when he was on the police force were mental health calls, right? And expressing, one of the things he expressed is the lack of resources he had in his toolkit, for lack of a better word, to deal with the mental health calls that he would come across. And one thing he said that stuck out to me for years and to this day sticks out to me about this topic, he's like, look, I only had a couple options when I get a response to when I'd get a 911 call and it was a mental health call. And those responses, and this has changed in some localities, but nonetheless, he's like, the only real capacities I had was to make a choice to arrest or not, to shoot or not, or whatnot. And I didn't have a lot of other tools in my toolkit besides that. And I started thinking about the work that a lot of our members do on a day-to-day, a lot of the community organizers I know do on a day-to-day, where when there's an emergency situation, they often get the first phone call. It's often not always 911. It's often them, right? And for a long time, I've sometimes been one of those people as well, right? And it really got the conversation going about how much, like once we start conceiving of safety and well-being of our loved ones as all of our responsibilities, we start talking about this differently. So with that in mind, I just wanted to just ask the first question and see where this conversation goes, which is basically, what does safety and well-being mean to you in your work on the day-to-day? And I don't want to pick on you, Mone, so I'll go the opposite direction. We'll go reverse clockwise. We'll start with Chris.
Oh, dang. I was thinking you were going to start with Tosh. I was like, okay, I got a little time. Yeah, I appreciate this question. Thank you so much, Subhash. I think I want to start with like what safety doesn't mean and what it doesn't mean, like how we're approaching it from our work. I think the kind of like dominant conversation around safety, particularly in public schools, has been really driven by like the increase in school shootings since the 90s, and like the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting like was a moment that in the state actually has really contributed to now a problem of over policing in our schools. And a lot of times, like, if you think about the issues from a perspective of like, not just like safety, but also from like resources, that the resources that are being diverted to policing are often coming at the expense of other critical resources needed in our schools. And so there's a really great report that was published by the ACLU last year that I would encourage folks to read, but it specifically like outlined how following like two laws that have created the Guardian program and requiring SROs be present in every school in the state, what we have seen is like a really drastic increase in school-based arrests, which means more youth being pulled into the school to prison pipeline, and that is coming at the expense of critical needs like nursing, that like many schools are actually understaffed on like healthcare providers, or that they don't have sufficient resources for like social workers or mental health professionals. And this is also all part of like a larger pattern of actually like taking resources from our public schools, like a pattern that's been happening since the 80s, and like actually diverting those resources to like for-profit education institutions. And so already like what happens, right, is that our teachers, for example, and our support professionals don't have enough resources to make sure that they're able to meet all of their students' needs in the classroom. Or there's, for example, in Orange County, like a major teacher shortage that's only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And like in the state, like teacher pay is abysmal. And what happens too, like when we're increasing policing in schools, is that there's actually like real disproportionality on who is feeling the impacts of policing, and that like the while like Black and brown youth and LGBTQ youth, particularly like queer and trans youth, make up smaller populations of the student body, they are making up increased or disproportionate populations of students that are being arrested or being met with like a kind of more carceral disciplinary interventions. And I also want to mention too that folks who are also at who are at that that are being over policed are also folks who are disabled, either with like mental, cognitive, or physical disabilities. And so all of that is like what it doesn't mean. And I think for us, what safety means is that, we're in a system or a society where everyone's needs are actually met. And so that includes like, when we're talking about our work in the education system, that everyone's needs are met like in the classroom or in the building, and everyone includes like the teachers, the staff, the students, and then we also mean like outside of the like actual classroom, and that the needs of students and their families are being met in their home. They have access, and not just access, but they have like housing, and housing that they like. They have food, they have the resources they need, and they're able to also have access to things that are like pleasure and joy and social interactions. And I won't like talk a whole lot about this because I know other folks will go into more depth about this on the panel. But it actually moves the framing to, what you were mentioning earlier, Subhash, of like, to a model of like actually community care, where everyone is actually invested in the well-being of those, like of our neighbors, of those around us, and that we all are taking collective responsibility to make sure those around us needs are being met. And like that kind of then, those kinds of models set us up that we don't need a system of policing. We could unpack that more. I'm going to stop for now.
No, thank you, Chris. Thank you. And Dandelion, what does safety and well-being mean to you in your work, and especially from the perspective of you working in a peer support space?
Yeah, thank you. So safety is paramount to me and all the work we do at Peer Support Space. So a little context, our organization is led 100% by and for folks with lived experience. That lived experience might be mental illness, disability, neurodivergence, or other various identities and intersections that might have layers of obstacles to mental wellness. And obviously no one person can represent an entire community, but when the spaces for healing and support are cultivated by and for peers with shared aspects of identity, it helps better ensure that cultural nuances are at the forefront. It ensures that autonomy is central, and this overall approach creates a deeper sense of safety for those involved. Safety and well-being to me and to our work means prioritizing the needs of unique needs of each person. If their emergency plan, for instance, calls on alternatives to policing because of past trauma or for whatever reason, then we honor that. And because humans are so beautifully diverse and unique, safety and well-being is going to be different for each person. So ultimately, peer support respects that every person is the subject matter expert on themselves, and all the work we do keeps that at the forefront. And to dive just a little further in, when a survivor is telling me that they have been systemically harmed or they don't want to engage in certain mental health practices for whatever reason, it's never my place to question the validity of that, but it is my responsibility to listen and respond accordingly to center their safety and well-being. And that's something that myself and the other folks at Peer Support Space take very seriously. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what safety and well-being means to myself and Peer Support Space.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'd love to unpack that later in the conversation. Aashutosh, same question, safety and well-being. What does it mean to you in your work, in your day-to-day?
I think this is a great question. So I think for me, safety means, and definitely to all the youth students in Florida, I think safety means being able to have a degree of self-actualization through the school systems that we send our youth through. I think that safety means that students are free to learn, and part of learning includes making mistakes and having a little bit more of a human touch when it comes to dealing with students and the mistakes that they make. in a lot of conversations that I've had with young people, they feel that more and more they can't tell the difference between going to school and going into, like a carceral facility. And in fact, there's been people that I've talked to that just, they tell me kind of like how they were brought into this school to prison pipeline, and they feel like it's like every degree of discipline that they got, they felt like it was just like one step closer. And a lot of people do end up going into juvenile facilities or even like adult institutions in Florida, like, adult prisons. And I think that that's really the opposite of what it means to be safe, right? Just like some really alarming numbers. I think this was mentioned in the ACLU report, as well as some reports by the Southern Poverty Law Center. But Florida is consistently in the top 2, if not the leading state, when it comes to sending juveniles, right, people under the age of 18 to adult prisons. And there's just like a lot of very minor things, right, that people think it's something that you would see in like Ferris Bueller, right, like all those classic coming of age movies. But when students of color, when students that are from lower incomes do it, it becomes a felony offense that they now have to go to an adult facility, right? And I think that is absolutely the opposite of what we want when it comes to safe schools. I think that there's some really good examples of public schools that have a lot of money that can be used to, counsel students, teach them about going to college, set them up with life skills. But I feel like there's a very big, I guess not a lack of equality, right? Like some schools have it, schools that are in affluent areas, that are in rich zip codes, and then schools that are in areas that are not well funded. They don't have these resources. And I think it's doing a really big disservice where instead of trying to invest in those communities and in these schools, rather it seems like the powers that be think that using the criminal system, right, the legal system to correct these people's behaviors, I think that is actually doing a lot more harm than good. So for me, safety just means just seeing a little bit of equality in the school system when it comes to how kids of color are treated, how low-income students are treated, and that also, I would love to see everyone have a chance to go through school with the same resources, right? Because there are some schools, right, that I consistently see that are ranked number 1 and number 2 in the top 50 in the U.S. And a lot of those schools are from Florida, but like some of the least resource schools are also from here. And I would like to see that we make an effort to kind of level that out. So.
Great, thank you. Courtney.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this question. And I'm actually happy that Chris, Dandelion, and Tosh could go before me and talk about what they think safety is, because when I'm thinking about safety in my work, it is all of those things and more, because all of the people that I'm serving are students, are people living with mental illnesses or disabilities, are underprivileged, are underserved, and fall into, most of them fall into these minority categories. So when I'm thinking about safety, and to your point, when I'm thinking about our community taking care of ourselves, it looks like a world where people using drugs are treated perfectly fine, no matter what substances they have in their body. It looks like a world where they have access to proper care and not just incarceration. I want everyone that comes into my syringe exchange for services to know that they deserve the same joy and pleasure and housing and healthcare and schooling as everyone else. So I think it's really important to focus on that. And then also, not to copy Chris, but I really do, because I want to be them. When I think about what safety isn't, I think about what's happening currently in Orlando for people using drugs. Since the beginning of this year, since January of this year, There have been over 3,000 overdoses, and 210 of those were fatal overdoses. We are one of the cities leading the new cases of HIV and Hep C. Orlando is facing a crisis, and when I think about safety for our communities that we're seeing, which, to be clear, are mostly LGBTQ communities facing this threat, it's not what's happening right now. It's being able to reverse an overdose for somebody you love without having to call the police and being scared of the threat of police. It's being able to access clean using supplies or Narcan and knowing that you're not going to be judged or arrested or targeted for that. Safety for me is a little bit different in this aspect because I'm really trying to frame it in a way that doesn't frame people using drugs as eventually going to stop. That's not what safety is for me. Some people will continue using drugs, and that's fine by me. I want people being safe the whole time they're using drugs. So when I think about safety, I think about sustained, proper healthcare. I think about sustained, proper housing, food access, education, job security, all of the things that we think everyone are entitled to, no matter if people are using drugs or are not using drugs. And when I think about safety, I think about the fact that even if you do experience an overdose or another medical crisis, you can rely on either your community or your local hospitals or doctors to not treat you any differently just because you might be using something. And I mean, I have literally had people who experience overdoses or who go to the hospital for endocarditis handcuffed to a bed because they were found with drugs on them. And I just don't know how that is safety. So when I'm thinking about safety, I'm thinking about the safety of my participants and my community. And I'm thinking that they don't have to be scared to go to the hospital for something potentially fatal. And they don't have to be scared to not ask for help or not ask for healthcare access, or they don't have to think that their children deserve anything less. And they know that they live in a community that's going to take care of them no matter what, and no matter what they might need. So I think that answers the question. That's what I think about.
Definitely. Mone.
So going last means you all set the bar pretty high, but that's I'm here for it. No, but if I had to put in one sentence, I would say that safety and well-being means investing in our communities and not policing them. It means being able to thrive and not just barely survive on a day-to-day in our communities. But, and I think Dandelion touched on this a little bit, I also recognize that the notion of safety looks and feels different for every single person, differently based on demographics and lived experiences. So for example, my almost 80-year-old grandmother, who's actually watching us live right now, hi Grandma, still thinks that having a uniformed police officer in front of her apartment building in East New York makes her safe, right? And that's okay, I get that. But I think most of us or all of us on this panel agree that a prison and police only approach does the opposite of creating real safety in our communities. I believe that it perpetuates fear. It often results in the loss of life for Black folks, and it dismantles community and dissolves the family structure. So I say all that to say that the inverse of the things that I just named is what safety and well-being means to me. So it's not living in fear. It's Black folks living long, fruitful lives. It's a strong sense of community and accountability. And it's a family structure in place for our children instead of them becoming wards of the state. If I think about it or talk about from an organizational perspective, Florida Rising, safety and well-being means ending mass incarceration. It means defending our Black and Latinx immigrant communities and eliminating laws that take away the rights from returning citizens, such as voting rights, and really just having all of these issues addressed through advocacy and policy change that has real teeth and that has some oversight that includes community members and grassroots organizations like the ones that each one of us represent.
That's great. And this whole conversation's kind of put a couple thoughts in my head that I want to put out there that don't need to be answered right away, but I'd love some reactions throughout our conversation on it. I think one thing is, when I started off saying that the folks on this panel take the idea that safety and well-being of the folks that we love in our communities is all of our responsibilities. The one thing I was remiss to state is, nonetheless, proactive safety and proactive well-being and my day-to-day proactive healing in our communities requires an intentionality and an investment, right? And so I'm glad I heard the word investment in there. So it's not just something that folks do because they feel the need to and have no resources to be able to do it, right? And so I'm glad I'm hearing these themes. And so one kind of question I want to put out there in the universe that we could hopefully get to by the end, or we could just fold into our other questions, is the idea of, like, if there was one intervention on the intentionality and investment side that you wish could be made to promote better safety and better well-being in our communities, what would that be? It doesn't have to be right this second, but just something for us to think about. But one thing I did want to ask everyone is, there's the folks that we know, there's the experiences that we've had, there's the stories we've heard in our communities that really helped us understand that either something needs to change, something needs to improve, or that this new thing that you experienced is really working. You wish everyone did it, right? So one question I want to ask folks is, like, what's one experience that you, your organization, someone you care about, someone you feel accountable to, has experienced that made you realize that we need to think about safety and well-being differently? And to break the circular conversation, so I'm going to start with Aashutosh. Throw a little curveball in here.
Nice. I like this. So I will say that for me, right, the one experience that, and this has been something a little bit recent, is just working with two high school students that, one ended up being tased by a police officer, and one ended up being kind of like slammed to the ground. And it was like something that was local, one in Lake County and one in Osceola County. I think that really sparked kind of a different fire under me, because it's one thing to read about it, but to talk to youth, right, and hear their story. I think this is like a very reoccurring theme, right? Like, there was such a big trail of just letdowns from the school system that led to the point of, a police officer having to physically, in like a very violent way, assaulting a student. And I think that we want to get to the point where we actually don't ever see that in our schools ever again. It's something that's very normalized, in the United States, just like levels of violence in the school system. But I think that it's unacceptable, right? And there's other countries where people would never imagine like an armed officer in a school, much less like using those weapons against the students that are in schools, right? So I think that we really have a great responsibility to young people to make sure that we are reversing this trend, because every year there's more and more money that goes into school resource officers. Even in some counties in Florida, they are hiring private police officers, which I think is still very troublesome, because where is the accountability when you have private contractors in a public school? There hasn't been a lot of precedents, right, to see like if things do go wrong, like where do people get held accountable? So I think that's something that's been really moving me, and more so in general, just hearing the stories and the experience of people that have been directly impacted. In the last few years, since the Amendment 4 campaign, I've had the privilege of listening to a lot of people who are returning citizens, and I think it is an unfortunate fact that the school system tends to be the first place where people are kind of pulled into being institutionalized, right, and repeatedly incarcerated. So I think that, you know, we have to, as a state, and also as a city, right, as people that are in Orlando who we want to do better, we want to set an example. I think it is really imperative for us to realize that we might have hit rock bottom, and now we got to make sure that we are on the up and up, right? Like, we're making every year better, just as every year, like, we've been pouring more and more money into making young people feel like they are in a highly militarized school system. I think every year we also have to put in more money to start reversing that, because sometimes if you keep on pouring money and the results aren't happening as you would like it, I think you just got to change course. And for me, that's something that I would really like to see in the next 10 years, is just this reversal in Florida, right? We're not in the news for all of the bad statistics, but rather we're in the news for a state that prizes students, right? We're number one in student achievement, number one in teacher retention, and so on.
Thank you. And as part of disrupting the circle, I'm gonna go with Chris.
You're really disrupting it. Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, what has really kind of, on a personal level, helped me think differently about safety and well-being is a combination of like the movement moment we're in, and also like from that movement moment actually coming to understand my own lived experiences in a deeper way. I think the moments that really, you know, politicized me were the killings of Trayvon Martin and Eric Brown, and I had been pretty, like, honestly an apolitical person up until that point in my life, and I had really kind of bought in to the ideology that like policing was a pretty like natural and normal institution, and that it worked. And then in those instances, I saw like really clear and tangible examples where like the quote unquote justice system was like not a system that was serving justice. And so, yeah, like, I don't think I would be at this understanding were it not for like the movement for Black Lives, and also like the development and leadership of Black feminists in my life, trans women of color, who have really just been pioneers of thoughts, like the thought that like alternatives are possible, and that like relying on our carceral system doesn't actually like serve us, and that relying on our carceral system doesn't serve us because it doesn't, at the end of the day, address like the issues at the root of the root causes of our issues, right? It doesn't address that people's like economic and material needs are not being met. It does not address that like we are not in actually like we're in a society that doesn't foster deep community with one another, and that like these alternatives are what actually like foster that deep community. And as I kind of like had my own politicization and like deepening of my analysis, I was able to then actually like look back and draw on like experiences, my own lived experiences, where I was like, oh, this like system actually also has harmed me and my family and hasn't worked for us either. And I think particularly the ways that like criminalization and institutionalization of people who use drugs, and people who have mental health issues, and me as someone with my own mental health issues, like realizing that responding in a carceral way isn't actually addressing those issues, and in many ways is actually exacerbating those issues. And the last thing I guess I want to say on that is like shifting my own understanding also required me to shift and actually deeply believe and hold as a value that everybody has the ability to transform. And that people also have the ability to like actually correct when they have harmed themselves or they have harmed others. And that doesn't mean that like you accept the harm, but it also requires just like a level of belief that like, that people's like, that people are in their own growth, in their own journey, and that with sufficient like resources and skills, with sufficient resources, skills, and support, that they can actually like transform behavior, and that ultimately is done in community.
Awesome, thank you. And let me see here, Mone.
Yeah. So one thing I'll say is, at Florida Rising, at the heart of doing work in community, we have to involve community. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but that's through, hiring, volunteer work, our members. So, one experience or story that I can think about is where we had some folks brought on, newer folks brought on to do some canvassing work from the community. And we don't put anyone through a whole lot of hoops. We just kind of learn people's strengths and opportunities through working with them, which is really cool, but can sometimes, be a challenge when a situation comes up that you're not necessarily prepared for. So anyway, yes, I'm about to tell a story. One day, a canvasser came into the office, just, as usual, getting ready to go out. And just for some context, our office is a suite within a larger building, and there's a building management on site. So that particular member of the team had a breakdown, and that breakdown flowed into the main building and outside near the entrance. And all I can remember is myself and other members of the team literally panicking because we knew that we needed to get control of the situation before the building management called the police, right? It was a young Black brother, and we knew that at the very least, it would result in him being arrested. And there was a likelihood that he could be shot or killed depending on which officer showed up and what mood they were in. And in that instance, safety and well-being shifted from trying to stop this young brother from damaging property or hurting one of us to how do we get him the care he needed in that moment and in the long term that, he obviously, was not getting, or just something happened that day, right? But the most frustrating part with us, as we talked about this, later on, or the next day, was we didn't know exactly where to turn to or who to call. We all pulled out our phones and reached out to personal contacts who might be able to come assist or give advice. But we realized that the same way that we have been conditioned to call 911 when we needed an immediate resource in that moment to show up within minutes to help folks who are dealing with mental health or have other needs. So that, for me, is a different kind of safety and well-being we need folks empowered to be thinking of. And that's just, one experience of something that just made me think of it differently ever since then.
Thank you for that. It's got my head thinking about a few other things. Courtney.
Thank you. You would think I would have my cursor closer to the unmute button and it wouldn't every time. I actually really like, Subhash, the end of your question when you said, what made you realize that the thing that you were doing was that new form of safety and security? And I also, your story about being in a car with a former officer who was talking about how they didn't have any resources to show up and respond to a mental health crisis other than either arrest or harm that person. Kind of go into what I think about and some of my experiences, because my first thought when you say that is that, well, the person used it. Well, my first thought is that somebody in that community would have known what resource they need. And it ties back and makes me think about the fact that police also don't know how to respond to overdoses. They do through Narcan, but all of a sudden they're public health officials at the same time. And this is something new for them. And this is a new resource that they're still not equipped, because when that person is done when that person comes out of their overdose, what happens next? That person doesn't feel safe. And neither do the police officers maybe, but the person who could reverse that overdose and know what to do would be the person in the community that they live with, that they feel comfortable with, that they are using drugs with. So I guess all of my stories just have to do with that. I've been doing this for kind of a long time. I'm pretty young, so only kind of a long time. But all of the stories that I think about when I think of what made you redefine wellness have to do with the fact that all of my experiences in harm reduction, in syringe access, and overdose prevention come from directly uplifting and working with the people in the community who are directly impacted, which means that a participant can walk into an exchange, and this has happened. A participant walks into an exchange to get services, and they're like, how did you do this? Like, what school did you, like, how did you go to school for this? And I'm like, oh, I didn't. I have a degree in creative writing. And I started doing this because I was a directly impacted person. And that person knows that they can work with me, work with our exchange, work with this program, and they can be treated as the experts in their own life and in their community, which they are, which is how it should be. So I think when I'm thinking about an experience that makes me feel like either A, what we're doing is the right step towards safety, or B, has changed my perspective on safety and wellness, it kind of all comes back to that, right? It kind of all comes back to the fact that we need to redefine safety and well-being as community care. And in that, knowing that what we're doing with syringe access, what we're doing with overdose prevention, what we're doing with harm reduction and all of these things is creating community care. We are uplifting a community of people who are told that they do not have agency. We are uplifting a community of people who are told they are going to jail for using a substance that they either do or do not want to stop using, but almost definitely do not have the resources to stop using if they want to. And that can't be community wellness and safety. That person doesn't feel safe. So all of those experiences just kind of brought me to the fact that we really need to redefine safety and community care. And we do that by centering directly impacted people. And I have 5 million stories about doing that. So I'm not going to go into all of them. But yeah, that's pretty much what I think about, is just the fact that anybody can walk into my syringe exchange with lived experience, thinking that they're just getting services, and they can actually become part of something that has to do with their community, and they themselves can redefine what safety and well-being looks like for them and the people they love.
Amazing. Thank you. Dandelion.
Thank you. Also didn't have my cursor close to the unmute. No, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Oftentimes when someone is in a heightened state of distress, the default response for a lot of folks involves calling law enforcement, and calling them in. And like Subhash uplifted in the beginning, and Courtney just reiterated, this is not something that they are readily equipped to handle. So when we engage in these conversations and talk about alternatives to policing, we are inviting folks into a deeper exploration that requires kind of a mental shift away from what they've always done and known to more expansive possibilities and approaches. And that can take some time, but these conversations kind of can lead to that shift. So that's why I'm really grateful to be here. But in terms of something that made me look at things differently, I was actually asked by one of our participants, one of our community members, to share this perspective. And they had an experience where, because of past experiences of having law enforcement respond to their suicidality and the trauma that came up from that experience, they feel trepidation now, even reaching out for help at all. So even when they know they're in a really heightened emotional place or perhaps unsafe, the fear of being re-traumatized or harmed again kind of makes them take a step back and not want to reach out for help, because that's how they were received when they were really vulnerable. And it just was not, the response that they were looking for. It was not helpful in that moment, and in fact caused a lot of trauma. And I have been in mental health spaces for over a decade. I know I look a little younger, but I've been in this sphere for a little bit, and I have heard this narrative time and time again. Just like Courtney, I have a lot of stories from, just listening to folks and being in those spaces and my own experiences. But because this is the experience of so many people, it is so vital to have spaces where our community members can reach out for help. We hear that phrase all the time. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. But then when you reach out for help, the response that you get, if they're not equipped to handle it and it becomes re-traumatizing, it's not actually, meeting your needs. So it's so important to have spaces where folks can reach out and be authentic, be candid about where they're at. And for peer support space and on our end, and for folks showing up to the call, for us to be equipped to fully honor their valid concerns and uplift what works for them. So ultimately, fully listening to folks cultivates deeper safety plans that are wholly trauma-informed. And that's really what we strive to do in all of our interactions. But also, we're a lived experience-led organization. So speaking from a place of my own experience and echoing what Chris said earlier, for myself, as someone who lives at the intersection of being disabled, mentally ill, and genderqueer, carceral approaches only exacerbate my distress. So I'm not feeling well. that's not the solution for me. So having a collective to tap into, trusted peers to lean on, and personal crisis plans that don't involve law enforcement, that's been life-saving for me. And to kind of pivot back to your question about intentionality, it takes some extra intentionality and proactive planning to take this approach. It's really helpful if you can do it beforehand. Sometimes crisis does not allow for that. Totally understand, but it takes some extra intentionality and proactive planning to take this approach. But I feel it's absolutely worth the effort.
Great, thank you. And as we're waiting for some audience questions, I wanted to just put a couple things kind of in the mix. We're about to talk about what are some opportunities for folks to get plugged into the existing work. And, I wanted to bring this other question up around, like, if there's one thing that we can do, if there's one like intervention that we wish could happen today, like by the end of the day, if I close a business today, or some folks close the business at midnight, some folks it's 5 o'clock. But if there's one intervention that could help us realize a new understanding of safety and well-being, what it would be. I want to throw that question out there a little bit, and I also just want to throw another question, and maybe it's more a concept. Like I think a lot of what we've said today around centering community care, intentionality and investment, and the communities that we represent, there's a theme that we come down to, which is the communities that have often been cast or painted or portrayed as being part of the problem are and should be considered part of the solution, if not the solution, right? And how do we make that the more prevailing narrative, right? Because when you consider someone part of the problem, then you have to deal with that problem a specific way. When you consider someone a part of the solution or the solution or having the solution within their grasp, you deal with them a separate way, right? And so I guess I just want to put that in. I just want to put that in there. And to be honest with you, I would love to have folks answer either all or any of these questions. Just what are some opportunities for us to get involved? Like if we had, we have about 6 minutes left, but if we had one intervention we could realize today, what would it be to realize safety and just like how we can better come to the understanding that folks that have for so long historically been considered part of the problem are actually part of the solution, if not the solution. So, like I said, take all three, take one, take part of it. I would just love to hear some responses on this. And honestly, this could be as the spirit so moves you. I won't pick anyone first. Or I might.
I can go first.
Go ahead.
So, I'll start by saying that, change comes through building people power. It comes through co-governance, and it comes through having, elected officials or people in power that are not only accountable, but are there to serve our communities, right? Whether it be through different opportunities to engage community, whether it be through making sure we are all safe and healthy. It's about community first. And I think one way to immediately take action is by, folks who want to do work in community, plugging into some of the grassroots organizations that are here in your cities or counties that are moving initiatives that are alternatives to policing and just overall criminal system reform. I can say, for example, Florida Rising has been building local budget committees to teach folks how to understand the budgeting process. Subhash, you talked about investment. I talked about reinvestment. So what that looks like in our municipalities, what certain line items mean for our communities, and how to push for allocations we really need, especially as it relates to funding for police departments versus investments for communities of color. It may seem like overwhelming things, but we are the change that we need. If we're fixing the problem, we have to make sure that our communities are ahead of it. Even what that looks like at the state level, there's a People's Budget campaign that I know our organization is one that's helping to lead the charge, but we can't do it without folks on the ground being a part of that. How are we pushing our legislature to approve a budget, every year during a 60-day legislative session that really focuses on investments in our communities? So those are, some two things that I would just name: being involved in the participatory budget process, both at the local and state level, to make sure that Black and Brown communities are receiving the right investment and getting tapped into organizations who can help give, community members the tools for success to do that.
Great. And I'm actually going to turn to Courtney because we had an audience question that also involved how do we tap into more information about harm reduction. So I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, thank you. First, to answer that question about how you can tap into more information about harm reduction, especially in the context of Florida, harm reduction is a brand new public health solution for, well, not for my community, but for the mainstream community. The IDEA bill just passed in 2019, and it's kind of a buzzword right now. So I really encourage you, in the context of Florida, to tap into harm reduction and information about it, to check out Florida Harm Reduction Collective. We have a lot of information that can tell you about syringe access, the history of harm reduction, how to get involved across the entire state with whatever efforts are going on, whether it's an access program, whether it's just carrying Narcan. If you want to learn more about it, we have a Facebook, we have an Instagram. I am in both of those inboxes, so you will be talking to me. So feel free to do that. And harm reduction has a really rich history, rooted in liberation of Black trans women, rooted in people using drugs, rooted in HIV and HIV prevention and health intervention. So definitely do your own research. There's a million resources out there, and it's all really interesting and a really great way. And then if you want to get involved locally, I would say it's by and large the same thing. You can come to Hope and Help. I'm here Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., or I'm out in the field. So you can follow us on Instagram at idea.orlando. I also answer those messages, so be nice to me. And we would love to have people come in, learn what we do, learn how to get involved. Anybody can help out, and anybody can learn more at any time. So definitely check out Hope and Help and all of that. And then I saw a question in the chat about decriminalizing sex work, which is, I know, not part of this panel at all, and going to come up later. But I do want to just pose a question to the person that asked that. And it was, how do efforts like decriminalizing sex work make our community safer? And I would just urge you, and this is going into my other point, I swear to God, urge you to, in your head, consider, how does it make it less safe? Because I think that's like a really big question. Like, how does sex work being decriminalized make you less safe? What do you think will happen? And I think that goes into my intervention that I wish people would, or the intervention that I would just instill in everybody immediately, which is that harm reduction does not mean taking a longer route to required abstinence. It means changing public health policies to allow people using drugs to continue doing that, for sex workers to continue working, because sex work is work. So I think the intervention that's needed is for everyone to really interrogate what that means to them. What does it mean to you to support people using drugs? Does it mean that you only support them if they want to stop using drugs? Because if it does, I don't want to unpack that with you, but you should unpack that. So my intervention would be to just really think about what it means to you to support people using drugs and to support public health, and how do you start to question that? And if you are interested in questioning that, then absolutely get involved in harm reduction work, and I would love to be any help that I can with that.
And so I know it's my fault because that's like a super loaded question. We have just a couple minutes left, and let's keep the conversation rolling. Aashutosh.
So for me, right, I think my answer to that question, as far as how do you get involved, is just join organizations, right? I think this time in history, I've seen so many organizations, whether it be Black organizations, youth organizations, young Black organizations, Latinx organizations. Like, people are getting together more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I think that it's imperative that you meet other people that you can really, click with, that you have shared ideologies with, that you want to change the world for the better, right? And I think that that's the first step, because every one of us has really great ideas in our heads, but if we just keep them in our heads, then we won't be able to change the world. But if we put our ideas together, I think it goes a long way. So I think that's just the first step to changing the world that we're in.
Thank you. Dandelion.
So I know we're getting a little close on time. So what I'm going to do is plug in some links in the conversation that anybody listening, if y'all want to get involved, peer support space, like I said, we're an entirely communal, lived experience led organization, and we love to have as many perspectives and friends on board as possible. So that might look like facilitating a group, volunteering, or just like kind of joining and being part of the collective. And we also, I am the co-founder of a grassroots nonprofit, so I would be remiss if I didn't uplift that we rely on communal funds to do the work that we do. We rely on mutual aid. I hate to be that person, but so I'm going to plug our Venmo in the chat as well. And if you have the means to give us a little love that way, that's also helpful. But yeah, I'm going to pass the floor along because I know we're a little close on time. So back to you, our moderator.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not. Everyone has said such brilliant things. I've been really grateful to be on this panel with such great minds. Similar to what Mone shared, like Central Florida Jobs with Justice is also working on the people's budget. And I think the other thing I just want to mention is that the shifting, moving resources from policing and investing them into like actual community needs is a popular idea, no matter what you may hear like big figureheads saying. Like, it is actually something that the majority of people want, especially in our state. The whole People's Budget campaign has a whole like bunch of research to back this up that they've conducted over the past couple of years. And then if you're really interested in getting involved in Orange County, specifically on initiatives in our public school system, if you're a student, I would tell you to get connected with Tosh, who's on this call, right? And if you're a parent and are interested in like exploring alternatives to policing in our schools, I would welcome folks to get connected with me.
Well, I just want to thank everyone, and once again apologize for asking a loaded question 5 minutes before we had to jump, so everyone could blame me for going over a little bit. But I thought this was just an important conversation. I'm glad we had a chance to really reframe the conversation and lead from what safety and well-being means to us, to our work, to our community, to the folks that we love. The last thing I want to plug really quickly is the federal stimulus sent millions of dollars into localities to deal with the effects of the pandemic. And the guidance from the Treasury Department and the White House has said that things such as community violence prevention, violence intervention, and behavioral health should be part of that investment. So the last plug I want to give folks is just to plug into those conversations about how we're leveraging this moment to make sure that some of the work to promote safety and well-being in our communities is actually being supported. Thank you all so much for this conversation and for your participation. Thank you all for tuning in, and let's just do what we need to do to keep the people that we love safe and well.